Welcome to another Noon Dish. I am Tommy Ashley. That's Don Callahan. We are sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Big Game USA. When we're talking football, we're talking Big Game USA. Don, let me show you a cool video. Hold on a second. Shout out to the folks that are already in the chat. If you're not in the chat now and you're watching this later, you can still get a hold of this football.
You think you know North Carolina? It's not just the Smoky Mountains and the Old Well. This is Kenan Stadium, where the Jordan Fly Elite game ball makes its debut and its homecoming. Born to fly, built for Carolina, snag your Carolina blue today.
Don Callahan.
I haven't found anyone who's willing to buy me one.
Well, here's one right here. You have to come get it, though, and you're going to have to pay me a lot of money because this is premium football from Big Game USA. You got the logos, you got the Jordan, you got the foot. I mean, you got everything. Carolina will be slinging this all over the field. Check out the description, link in the description, and the links on the Tar Pit Premium message board. You can get a hold of this football for yourself. Don, it's going to be it's a busy time for you, especially. Not only transfer portal stuff still a thing, but high school recruiting, high school official visit season is heating up. A lot of news on Tar Pit Premium message board. Just sort of tell me what your last couple of weeks have looked like.
Well, it's been busy. You know, whenever there is a practice like there is today, Wednesday there's a practice, and obviously Tuesday there was a practice too, and there's been a practice every Saturday minus that week for the spring break. You know, just tracking what kids are visiting North Carolina. And we were talking kind of in preparation, and this is just kind of, I think, epitomizes the situation. We were kind of discussing what we need to talk about. And I said 2 commits. Well, there are actually 3 commits that we need to talk about. We haven't had a chance to talk about because since the last time, I believe Trayshawn Ruffin committed. Correct? Yeah, that was in mid-March. So since then, Darian Kirksey, Omari Johnson, and KJ Miles have committed to North Carolina. So we haven't had a chance to talk to any of those guys. There was official visitors this past weekend. I also went to the Under Armour Camp in Charlotte, which we can get into. There are a bunch of notable visitors last week with Noah Clark, a 4-star defensive tackle from Durham, North Carolina, and Samari Smoke Matthews, a top 75 prospect in the nation, who finally made his way to Chapel Hill last Wednesday. So we had updates on all of those guys. Where do you want to kind of go, Tommy?
Well, just for folks watching this, my roof is being replaced as we speak. So if you hear some hammering, it is not Don. It's not the baby. It's probably at my house. They are literally outside my window here working hard. Got a perfect day for it. It's about 55, 60 degrees. So glad they're able to get it done today. But Don, let's start with the commitments. You mentioned the 3 that came in. Darian Kirksey, Harrison Central High School, Gulfport, Mississippi. That's not a place that you see many North Carolina commits from. I mean, and that's what's interesting about the Belichick way of doing things. We're getting guys committed from different parts of the country that have not normally been in the North Carolina footprint. But let's start with Kirksey. Tell us what you got.
So the most interesting part about him is just his actual commitment. He was supposed to visit UNC this past weekend. Things didn't work out from a logistics standpoint on actually traveling to Chapel Hill, and he just woke up and said, I might not be visiting North Carolina this weekend, but that's where I want to be. I'm going to commit to North Carolina. So he's another commitment who has made his decision without seeing campus. He's working to visit North Carolina at some point, has an official visit scheduled in June. But yeah, so he committed this on Friday, right before he was supposed to be leaving for Chapel Hill.
That's crazy. Sight unseen commitment from Kirksey. Another guy, Jackson, Mississippi. Is it Omari?
Yeah, Omari Johnson.
Omari Johnson. I saw the name and I was like, oh, that sounds familiar, but it's just Omari. A defensive back, 6'1", 170-ish, a 4-star guy, according to 24/7. What's your thoughts there? I mean, another Mississippi kid.
Yeah, so a Mississippi kid, that's a little strange for us, but it at least is a little bit, quote unquote, normal in that he had visited North Carolina a couple weeks ago. Really liked the visit. Scheduled 3 official visits. The first one was North Carolina this past weekend. So he spent the entire weekend in Chapel Hill. And he called me from the airport, because we had arranged to talk. And he said, "Hey, I just committed." And I said, "Okay." And I'm thinking that, what typically happens is official visits usually end with a meeting with the head coach. And that's kind of the closing sort of situation. And that's when a lot of commitments take place. But he actually left campus, got to the airport, and then just said, "You know what? I'm just going to commit." And he committed to North Carolina while he was at RDU Airport. The intriguing thing about his situation is that he has a pair of teammates, TJ White, who's a 4-star linebacker, and defensive lineman Darian Albert, who are officially visiting North Carolina this weekend. Now, he's already kind of given us a little bit of sneak peek of what their mindset. Both of them, I spoke to both of those guys after they initially visited Chapel Hill last month, and both are very high on UNC. But according to Amari, both intend to ride out the process, take all of their official visits. They each have 4 or 5 official visits scheduled. So yes, so they probably won't follow the same path as Amari, but Amari admitted that he didn't anticipate making a commitment this past weekend either.
I was going to ask you, Armando Bacot famously said, "Don't visit Carolina if you don't want to commit." It's not the same in football, obviously, but how many guys are officially visiting? If I had to ask you that you're surprised about, given it's North Carolina football, if you take away the Belichick factor, I'm sure the list would be much different. But how many guys have surprised you? You don't have to name names, but just are there a lot of people officially visiting you? You're like, "Oh, that's interesting," or is it about normal for you?
No, it's definitely been a lot more visits from players that I didn't expect. The official visit weekend is a prime example. We knew about Amari Johnson, and then 4 other national guys were added to the weekend. What surprising, at least to me, is that there was very limited connection, at least publicly, between North Carolina and those guys. I did catch up with Xavier. I'm forgetting his last name, who officially visited. He's also from Mississippi, the wide receiver. Afterwards, and North Carolina made a good impression on him. But those guys kind of surprised me, just because there wasn't a whole lot of mention of North Carolina with them, and then all of a sudden they're in Chapel Hill. And I think that's going to be kind of the theme. I think the staff is trying to stuff these weekends as much as possible. And with some of the national guys who have basically their race kind of set, which means they have official visits set during those quote unquote prime weekends in June. The only way North Carolina is going to kind of get in there to get their a shot at some of these guys is to kind of bring them in April or May.
A couple of things. One, it's Xavier McDonald, if I'm not
Xavier
mistaken.
McDonald.
See, I'm
Thank
doing
you.
your job. And 2, I'm not sure your voice is coming through that microphone. It sounds like it might be your computer microphone. Either way, the dulcet tones of Don Callahan shine through, but not quite as fancy as through the microphone. I could be wrong.
No,
But anyway.
I think you are correct.
We are talking with Don Callahan here on the Noon Dish. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and shout out to Big Game USA with the Jordan Fly Elite Football official team ball of North Carolina football. Not sure if they'll be using it on Saturday's open practice. I don't think so. It'll be the game ball this fall. But Don, how big can you get it, or do I need to pause the video?
No, you're good. You're good. I think I can. How's that?
I think it's the same. It doesn't matter. It sounds fine to me.
How's that?
But I don't think let's not worry about it. This is not good for live radio.
All right.
Or live YouTubes. But and I can also hear myself coming through your speakers, which I don't normally. But anyway, how big is Saturday with the open practice, public open practice and all? How big a weekend is this for North Carolina recruiting?
I think I fixed it. Is that better?
You did fix it. Yes, sir.
Okay. The little box thing was not fully attached, and once I kind of clicked it, then it became an option. How big is Saturday? I think it's just as just as big as Si's in Fuquay. That's not that far from me. I live literally, when you come outside of my neighborhood, I'm technically Holly Springs. You make a left, it's Holly Springs, but if you make a right, you'll see the sign that says "Welcome to Fuquay," and Fuquay High School is very, very close to me. Anyway, back to Tommy's question. Yeah, I think Saturday is just as important as any other Saturday. There's going to be some top recruits there. Obviously, weekends are easier to travel, although we've seen plenty of top targets visit North Carolina in the middle of the week. And that's usually made possible because of spring breaks around this time. But yeah, I mean, I haven't had a chance to really dive into it, but I do have a running list I kind of have going for myself for the weekend. And there are some quality names on that list.
Are we going to see Don Callahan there? I would assume so.
That is the initial plan.
Cargo shorts, or we're going.
If that's what you want, that's what you will get.
Man, I was kind of hoping you would get into the 2025. But anyway, it's it's going to be an interesting weekend. If you're around Chapel Hill, you're in Fuquay, really no excuse. Get to Chapel Hill. I believe 6:30 in open practice. A very important baseball game earlier that day against Wake Forest as well. Preston loved doing the baseball coverage, so appreciate the shout out there. Don, when you look at the commitments, the visits, and all, what is the common theme here that you're hearing from recruits? I think that's important. Let's work through those a little bit. Practices for me, the one we saw, we didn't see much, but I've heard, and of course we reported, a lot more physical, a lot more work being done, it seems like. No wasted time. But what's the common theme that you get from recruits after they visited North Carolina during all these practices?
So I'll answer your question, but let's not forget KJ Miles, like I forgot him earlier. But yeah, I think the feedback is what you kind of expect. A lot of people saying it's definitely, you can see the pro elements of practice, no wasted time, very efficient, very purposeful in everything that's being done. And so that's definitely what I ran a story right before we hopped on here that had feedback from a handful of recruits who visited Tuesday or on Saturday, and their observations kind of just fell in line with that. Just very purposeful, no wasted motion. Just very efficient, professional, what you would expect from a professional practice.
Yeah, and let's talk about it. I'm having to mute myself while you're talking, but I think they've gone to lunch. So that's a good thing. They hooked me up with lunchtime during our noon dish hour, and shout out to the 100 people that are watching.
Maybe they're going to watch the noon dish.
Yeah, maybe. I see a guy out there on his phone looking at us. He's laughing. KJ Miles, you mentioned him. We did not talk about him in the initial two commitments we mentioned earlier, but just KJ Miles' commitment to North Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, he was a kid who visited a couple weeks ago and had initially planned to do the whole, take the official visits, had more visits he wanted to take and that sort of thing. Had an official visit set with Memphis, I believe, and North Carolina. And just ultimately, he's having some problems with his phone, so I haven't been able to actually talk to him since he committed. But I had talked to him before when he was telling me that he was leaning in that direction. And it just seemed like he just kind of realized he knew where he wanted to go, and might as well just go ahead instead of waiting until June to make those decisions.
Yep, Carver High School, Columbus, Georgia, 6'3", 165-ish wide receiver. So good, tall, and long. Needs to add some weight there, and most certainly will as a 26 guy. I believe, if my math is correct, and I don't do math extremely well, but that's 11 commitments in the 26 class so far.
Yeah,
I'll count it for you.
Yeah, I got 11.
And exactly one from the state of North Carolina, which is very, very different, I think. That's different, right? That is bigly different than in years past.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, this has been a topic of conversation on the Tar Heel premium message board for sure. And while that, there have been prior coaching staffs that haven't done well in state in certain cycles, or maybe the state was down or whatever. I think what's most, I guess, worrisome when I look at it is the fact that the 26th class is one of the better classes that the state has had in a very long time. Definitely the best class since that historic 2021 class. So initially, before North Carolina had made any of these moves and we kind of knew Mac Brown was on his way out and everything, I was kind of thinking in my head, this will be a great situation for a new coach to walk into, because typically coaches get that first year bump. And that bump is because in first full year. So I'm not talking about 25 class, I'm talking about the 26 class. And the reason being is that coaches can kind of come in and not have to answer to what has happened previously at the school, because now they're bringing this brand new vision and doing things differently and that sort of thing. And so typically that results in the school doing better in state, or just overall, but definitely in state. But the thing too that's really kind of surprised me is not necessarily the strikeouts, it's not making these top schools lists. Now, someone's going to mention, being second place is just as bad as being last place. And actually, I had a really good recruiter tell me one time that last place is actually better than being in second place, because last place didn't waste the time and the resources that second place did. But I think it's just when you look at guys like, the Harris twins, and even like Gordon Sellers, really, because he visited North Carolina in late January, and Belichick went out and saw him at Providence Day, to not make his finalist list, to me is a little worrisome. And so I have been trying to find out just exactly what is going on here. Why are the in-state guys there's not as much momentum? There's not. And when I say that, I'm not saying that there's not any. Trayshawn Ruffin is an in-state guy who committed to North Carolina. There's other in-state guys like Tex Vaughn, who I think UNC is in a really good spot with. And there's a couple other guys that in-state that UNC is in a good spot with. The kids from Crest High School, who are officially visiting coming up, UNC is in a great spot with. So it's not a complete, like, having no success in state, but there is something going on here that doesn't seem right. And it's not just purely, UNC doesn't like some of these kids. In some cases, I'm sure that's the case. I think though that there is there's something that's, something missing here that I haven't really yet completely put my finger on.
It's an interesting take, and I was going to go there, but you mentioned the strength of the 2026 class here in the state of North Carolina. So it'll be interesting to see if they can combat that, overcome that, whatever you want to call it. There's still a little bit of time before June, and I know we've talked about teams like to have their classes filled up and all, so we'll see how that works out. As far as getting visitors to – how many official visits come out of the practice visits in general? Like if a guy shows up for a practice, how often are they translating into officials? Is it case by case, or how do you want to call it?
Well, it's definitely case by case, but it'd be great to go back and kind of chart that out. Now, I just ran the story I just ran. I mentioned was it like I'm trying to remember, 5 or 6 recruits in there, and I think 3 or 4 of them had either scheduled an official visit or were intending to schedule an official visit. Now, there was one that was a little bit on the fence and seemed unlikely to schedule an official visit. That's well, I guess I shouldn't give away the premium content, but so yeah, and I brought up Samari Matthews from a top cornerback from just outside of Charlotte. He visited on Wednesday. He's kind of debating on whether to add UNC to his official visit schedule, and it looks like he's going to, and that's going to potentially happen in April. But then you have, or this month. But then you have Noah Clark, who he wouldn't. He used some really careful words in kind of describing North Carolina's chances on ending up on his official visit schedule. The problem is he has like 5, or I think it might be 6 or 7 official visits set. So for him, he's probably like, man, this is already plenty. So it doesn't look all that promising that North Carolina's going to get an official visit. So yeah, I mean, it is case by case. I think there have been some success stories, and there definitely have been some situations that haven't led into positive directions.
Let me go back. You mentioned, and I meant to ask this question when you said it. It's better, or some people talk about being last versus being second. And I agree with the fact that if you're second, you spend a lot of time and effort and resources to recruit a guy and he went somewhere else. What about in the era of the transfer portal? And this is maybe a question you can or cannot answer, but you can certainly speculate, I think. How big is the relationship built in recruiting and the closeness of that relationship, even if a guy goes a different way initially and then the portal becomes a thing? Because it seems like, when you're recruiting players, it's good to have some familiarity in the portal, and they had the same with you. How big of that is it, do you think?
Yeah, so that statement where it's better to be last place than second place was actually said to me way before the portal became a thing. So it doesn't really apply too much. But yeah, I think you're onto something there, to where if you're recruiting a kid, if Tommy is recruiting me and I go somewhere else, and then your school, I go in the portal, your school needs a player like me again, and we have a prior relationship, it does make it a whole lot easier for you to recruit me than to recruit somebody that you don't have a relationship with. So it definitely helps. So the whole idea of not burning bridges is very, very important in this day and age of the transfer portal. Of course, who knows what college football is going to look like in 4 or 5 years? So there's that too.
And I mean, at least, and I would assume it's similar on the football side, but at least on the basketball side, it's totally transactional in the portal, or not totally. Nothing's ever 100%, but it is very transactional in the portal, and it's all about money and all of that, it seems. I would assume football is going to be, if it's not already the same way, especially at a school not named the big 3 or 4 or 5. Anything left, Don? I want to take a break, and then I want to talk about the Under Armour camp that you attended.
No, I think we did a good job of covering the 3 commits and making sure we didn't forget any this time.
Yeah, no, we're in there. We're all in there. Of course, check out Don's work on the Tar Pit Premium message boards and on Inside Carolina, the premium stuff. He's got just a ton of information on all these commitments, all these visits. But I want to talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnyt-shirt.com. They are sponsors of the show. They've got some great swag in the store or online. If you're so inclined, you can donate to Don Callahan's clothing fund and get him some Johnny T-shirt. He is sporting a 24/7 shirt today, so that's a good thing. No Phillies, none of that. But we can get Don Callahan all the swag delivered straight to his house at johnnyt-shirt.com. Check them out. Awesome sponsors. And if you're watching Don Callahan and you're reading Don Callahan, that means you're likely a premium subscriber on the message boards, and you get that 10% off your order at Johnny T-shirt. Just check the code on the message boards, put it in on the when you order online, or tell them in person, and they'll hook you up with 10%. Also, Big Game USA, I talked about it earlier. That's the football behind me on the shelf. A great way to get a piece of the action at North Carolina. The official game ball of UNC, a sponsor here at Inside Carolina. National guys will pay the bills. It's noon dish. Don Callahan, you made a trip to Charlotte, it appears.
I did.
Tell us how. First of all, let's do this. How have these camps changed over the years, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of your specific trip this year.
So they have changed in the fact that they are just another aspect of recruiting that has been impacted by the sped up calendar, meaning these used to be mega events for the current class, meaning the 2026 class this time. And while we definitely had some top 26 players there, such as Samari Matthews, who I mentioned earlier, and Noah Clark, and there was a bunch of others, there were a lot of absent players. And that's just, Nike camps aren't going on anymore. There's very few of the the opening ones. Very few of the Elite 11 stuff's going on anymore. It's just the nature of recruiting. These things are just kind of dying a slow death, and it's unfortunate because they're fun opportunities to watch some of the top recruits compete against each other. There definitely were a lot of really good underclassmen that UNC has offered, but still, they're a year away from really truly mattering in the whole scheme of things with recruiting. But so far less of the current class shows up, and then even you have the infamous Kendra Harrison was there, and he just was there because he's going to be playing in the Under Armour game and had to make the appearance. But the Reidsville High basketball team was invited to the basketball game in Charlotte, and so he had to leave early and couldn't participate. So stuff like that happens, which is just really unfortunate.
A lot of stuff going on for kids these days. What stood out to you this year at the camp? I see you have a nugget on Keyshawn Stansel from Clayton, right down the road here in Clayton. Good football player here, and that's one of your many nuggets. But what really stood out this year for you?
Yeah, so that's kind of the other thing, to go back to your first question, is that in the past I would spend so much time trying to get an evaluation on some guys, but really that has become not as important from a coverage standpoint. And as I said, if you're only seeing a couple of the top players from the region, it makes it hard to kind of make any sort of judgment. So really, you watch the camp, you enjoy the one-on-ones, but for me, the moments where we're getting an opportunity to talk to the recruits, that's where I get the most. And with Stencil, he's another guy who visited North Carolina recently for a practice in early March, has an official visit, has a pretty lengthy official visit schedule already put together, and UNC is trying to get into that official visit schedule. I think UNC will have UNC will have success, because it seems like he's open to trying to sneak in an official visit to North Carolina in April. He mentioned to me that if it didn't happen in April, it probably wouldn't happen. I think he has some other obligations in May, and then of course most of June for him is booked with official visits elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, he's a kid that's from right around the corner from your house, defensive tackle from Clayton High School.
Yeah, big time. I mean, he's a solid player. And if you're on the premium message boards, you can see his visit list. He's got quite a few big names. He's got another name that North Carolina fans are not going to like when they read it as well. So check out that on the Tar Pit premium message board under the Under Armour thing. Don, just for edification purposes, for people that don't go to these camps, as far as what the kids do, is it a lot of 7-on-7? Is it a lot of one-on-one drills? Is it a lot of solo drills? Just what exactly are happening at these camps these days?
So they break it up into essentially three subsections, right? So first is the linemen. The linemen come in, they go through all the combine events, like you would see at the NFL Combine, and then they will do position drills. And then the position drills do go on for a good bit, and then they'll do one-on-ones, which is, I guess, the highlight of the subsection. And then after the one-on-ones, they'll do like a award ceremony where they give like an MVP for each position, and then the media are allowed to interview the linemen. And that same sort of itinerary is followed with the running backs and linebackers, and then after that, it would be the receivers, DBs, and quarterbacks. And usually they have a quarterback or two who will also work out with the running backs and linebackers, just because they kind of need them for their one-on-ones. But so it's good for it. It's actually a good setup the way it's set up nowadays. It wasn't always the case. So linemen would get there, I think it was like 9:00, and they'd be done by, I think, 11. And there is that overlap. So where the linebackers and running backs are arriving, I think at like 10, and then they'll be out of there by noon. And then I think the receivers and quarterbacks and DBs, that section is a little bit longer, but there's still some overlap with the running backs and linebackers. So so basically the kids aren't there all day long. The media is, but that's fine. And you're able to see each position group without kind of missing stuff. You know what I mean? So, which is nice.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how long a day is it for you and other media covering this, and who all comes, like media wise? Like who did you see there? Not to get you name
So
dropping,
it's
but
mostly 24/7 reporters, and Rivals reporters are there, and On3 reporters are there, and then maybe you might see some independent sites. Every once in a while, you might see a newspaper at some of these events. You know, I typically, I didn't this year, but I typically go to the one in Georgia. It was a little bit earlier in the cycle, and there was a lot of other things going on in North Carolina football at that time, so I didn't go. But it was also the day of the Super Bowl. But yeah, that one, as far as a media and even a usually a talent standpoint, is just unbelievable. And then you want to talk about that. It was at that Carrollton High School. You want to talk about facilities. They have an indoor full field practice facility, which is what they use for this event. It's pretty spectacular. And just, I mean, the campus of that high school in general is just absolutely mind blowing.
yeah. And for the record, that is a high school.
Yeah.
It is different. It is different. I've been to several away baseball games this year, and I've seen some high school facilities in those bigger states that blow away some of these college facilities. It's unbelievable the money spent. But money's the name of the game in the NCAA landscape. We're talking with Don Callahan here on the Noon Dish, 32 minutes in. Not sure we're going to get to an hour, but I do want to get some questions in.
Okay.
And shout out to Gary that popped up in the chat from Winston. And Hubert B. Hoyle's question from the 20 for the 20, I can throw it up there on the screen. For the 2026 class, with Belichick being hired in January, does that put him behind in the 26 class? Don, is that the case, or how do you see that?
So he was hired in December, and I think relative to other coaching hires, yes, relative to other coaches who are being hired, it's around the same time, right? We're not, I mean, there were some who were hired before, some hired after, but relative to those, he's not. Now, yes, he has established relationships and all that sort of stuff. And so compared to, say, NC State, Doran and his staff, they have the relationship established already. And so that needs to be kind of worked on early on at North Carolina. But this is what happens when you go through a coaching change. And one of the benefits, as I mentioned earlier, is you get that bump because of the fact that typically you end up most of the time, new coaches still end up doing well, even though they're working at a starting deficit, because of the fact that they don't have to answer to the prior season, because it wasn't their season. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, he's having to, Belichick's having to dig out of Mac Brown's hole. And that's just not the case. That's just not, if you go back and look, Mac Brown, who was hired a little bit earlier, had one of his better classes with his first class. And if you look at some of the other schools, so it's not just an UNC Mac Brown thing, look at some of the other schools in the last couple of years, many other ones end up doing pretty well in that first cycle, because again, the one thing that you have to, we talk about prestige and perception of your program. Well, when you don't have when you didn't coach the prior season, you can get kind of creative with that perception and what the program is going to look like. Now, if you have a prior season and whatever it is, you have to answer to that. So it makes it a little bit harder for you to kind of finagle. If you went 6-6, it's a lot harder to kind of preach on what you're going to do, that you're going to be so much better than that in the next season, whereas whatever North Carolina went last year, it doesn't matter, because Belichick's a new coach. He's going to do things differently. He's going to have different results than what Mac Brown would have. So I don't think it's, I mean, they had to put in some work to establish relationships for sure. And they were on the road and they were attempting to do that in January.
I was going to ask you how long does the new car smell stick for a coaching staff?
I think it sticks for a while. I mean, I felt like under Mac Brown, I felt like it stuck for a very long time. And some of that was helped by the fact that that first season, if you correct me if I'm wrong, you I guess cover it or focus on it a little bit closer than I do. But UNC wasn't expected to do very well. They come out of the gates with Sam Howell and got some wins that people didn't anticipate and ended up doing a lot better than what people expected. But forgetting all that, I still think that the new car smell lasted for Mac Brown for a couple of seasons, probably longer than what was,
I don't know if we lost Don or that's on my end. I'm not sure. So somebody in the chat, let us know if that's Don's gone or if
am I
that's
here?
me. Yeah, you're back.
Okay.
I don't know if it was on your end or my end, but you just kind of went.
No, well, so I was there when you were talking, and then I went black, but then I went back.
Okay, so yeah, and they said Don froze. I kept, I got high speed internet, not rats running in a little wheel.
No, I have my Ting internet over here.
Yeah, I got you. So, but you were saying the new car smell sticks for a while. At what point? Like somebody in the chat asked, or I heard a question a while ago. At what point does what Belichick actually puts on the field matter? That's not going to really affect the 26 class.
No, it won't affect the 26 class. I think it's more of like right now we're 100% new car smell, and then I think after next season that starts to be, I don't know. I mean, maybe it starts to be 50% new car smell, 50% what the season is, and it just kind of slowly, that percentage kind of changes slowly over time. I just randomly kind of picked the 50-50 just to kind of be safe. But yeah, so I think it does kind of, and then you get a little bit of bump depending on what the expectations are for the season.
Absolutely. Again, talking with Don Callahan. Shout out to 120 plus folks in the chat here on a Wednesday on the Noon Dish. We are live at 12:39 p.m. My workers have gone to lunch, so it is peaceful and quiet. I'm used to working in the middle of chaos at ball games, so the noise is not a factor, but I did not want it to affect folks watching this show. So shout out to them for hooking me up. Another question. New King God asks, when will North Carolina get the top ACC class? Don, is that realistic to think that that's possible?
I think it's realistic. It's not easy because Clemson does a really good job. Florida State does a really good job. And even though it doesn't always translate to on the field success, Miami usually recruits really well every season. So it's not easy. It can be done. And I'm sure we could probably look back in prior years and see North Carolina getting really close, maybe even getting that top ACC class in prior years. I just don't have that information kind of pulled up at the moment.
You mentioned Miami. It's interesting. New King has Henry. Is it Henry the Ibis? Miami's mascot there on there. I don't know if you noticed it. All right. Yeah. Here's an interesting question from Tar Heel Huddle, and I do want to ask you this. There's two sort of quote unquote negative recruiting questions I want to ask, but let's do this one first. Is this NFL quote all business or print all business approach having a negative impact on some of the in-state athletes choosing to take their talents elsewhere? Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be specifically the in-state, but is the all business NFL approach a bad thing? I would think that it's not, given that that's the goal for everybody. But your thoughts here, because every kid's different, every young man's different.
Yeah. So I think the NFL approach is a couple different things. So I think we have to be careful. So I think the approach to the program seems to always be resonating with recruits. So when they see it ran like an NFL program and they're talking about the 33rd team and all that sort of stuff, that definitely seems to resonate with just about every recruit, because just about every recruit is looking to go to the NFL. I think when we talk about it from a standpoint of approaching it almost like NFL free agency, and like you're trying to court adults who have families, who don't have time to spend an hour on the telephone or don't have time to text back and forth with someone. Some recruits that works great with, some others who want to be loved up, that's not working so well. And I think that might be where it's just a theory. I'm not saying this, so I don't want anyone to get mad because, I think that might be where we're kind of seeing the issues for North Carolina. If you're a recruit and you have Clemson, you're calling them, and you're talking to all of their coaches on Tuesday nights for an hour, and then their position coach and your area recruiter are texting you every single day, and you're getting the same from Georgia and getting the same from Ohio State, and then North Carolina, you hear from, Lombardi a couple times a month. That matters. That impacts things. You want to, kids who want to go where they're wanted, why would you go to the school who's only hitting you up every so often? You would go to one of the schools that are hitting you up a lot. Relationships matter. I mean, how many times have we seen recruits commit to a school because of relationship? We can say all we want about how they shouldn't be doing that. We all know, we're adults. We know you shouldn't be making your, such a life-altering decision based off of what an adult is doing at that current moment, even though that adult could be gone in 6 months. But that's what they do. That's the whole reason why those two kids, those three defensive backs from California committed to North Carolina, because of their relationship with Mondo. And so the relationship aspect matters a lot. So that's why I think you're seeing situations like Samari Matthews, who North Carolina has been able to kind of sort of get back in with, because Mondo has been recruiting him and developing a relationship with him. And that's why he was he visited, and that's why he'll likely return for an official visit. So those sort of things matter. I don't think there are certain position groups that aren't getting that sort of love, and that's a factor. One of the things I mentioned on the message board is I had a recruit tell me he didn't know who his position coach is at North Carolina. And we can say, well, the kid can look it up. I mean, it's not really his job. If I'm looking for a car and I don't know that this car has cruise control, even though it does, and so I decide not to buy that car, I leave the lot, go somewhere else because that dealer is telling me that this car has cruise control. That's the fault of the salesman. So I think that's, if you have kids who don't know who the position coach is in North Carolina, I mean, that's kind of a problem. So I think some of this is impacting things, but there are definitely examples of where everything is going really well. Trayshawn Ruffin, his example, he says he is from North Carolina all the time, loves the coaches, great relationship. So it's going well there. And we can point on to a couple other guys where the relationships are there, the communication is there, and it's going really well with them.
Let me ask a question. Cy jumped in with a question here that I think is pretty relevant. Do recruiters ask kids how much they want to be contacted, or do they try to fill it out, or how does that work? And for me, I like to, for people I have a relationship with, I like a check-in every day, or as much as possible. At least let me know how things are. But what about these young men getting recruited? How does that work? That's
a really interesting question. And, one, we're talking about, man, how many recruiters are there? There's 130 FBS schools, each have 10 assistant coaches. We're talking about a lot of people to paint a broad brush on. I think it's probably a little bit of a feeling out process. It's just like what we do. I think we know, like if I call Tommy, he's not going to answer his phone, but if I text him, he'll get back to me.
That is correct. If I text you, do not call me back. I texted you.
Tommy will ask me a question, and I will literally call him, and he doesn't answer. And I'm like, what the hell? I know you have your phone.
It's on silent.
But it's a feeling out process, with all of your friends. I'm sure you treat different people you associate with differently, and some of that is just kind of established over time. And so recruiters have to kind of figure that out, just like a salesperson has to kind of figure out what is the best way for me to make this sale. What does this person really want? what works for them, how frequently should I contact, and yeah, there are definitely recruits who don't want to be hit up all the time. There are definitely, I think one of the smartest things that North Carolina does is recruit IMG. Why? Because those kids are for the most part, they're no nonsense. They are there. They're at a boarding school purely for football. So of course they don't want all the hoopla for the most part. They just want to get to the NFL the quickest way possible. I mean, they are foregoing a lot of the high school, traditions by going to a boarding school in Florida away from their family so that they can go to the NFL. So of course, those are the guys that probably don't need to be hit up every single day, but there are guys. I mean, you have kids. How often you see them on their phone texting? When I go and check in with my daughter, she'll be on some sort of FaceTime with like 5 other people. So it's you have to kind of get in with how these kids do things, and hitting them up is part of it for some of them. So but to answer the question, I think it's a feeling out process, and I'm sure there are some coaches who probably ask recruits flat out, "Hey, are you cool with talking? I want to talk at least once a week. What are you cool with?" And I'm sure that's part of it.
Yeah, we're going to wrap this up. My guys are getting back. I see the cars pulling up, the trucks
That was a
pulling
quick
up.
lunch.
So yeah, I mean they've got a lot of work to do. These guys that can flip a roof in a day is pretty impressive. And it turns out that I've got some rot. Not that anybody needs to know business, but there's wood
That's
rot.
some personal stuff going on with your
It
rot.
is very personal. With you get old, you have rot, and this house is getting some age on it. I've got one more question. Somebody on the message board, 4D Forever, asked about the negative recruiting due to Belichick's age. So you can comment on that. But I had this question here, and this is going to be our last question because we're going to get out of here. We're not going to have a top 5 because I hadn't thought of one. But Daryl D asked in the chat, does the NFL deal perspective, is that more attractive than the Carolina brand? That's an interesting question.
That is interesting.
Your thoughts on it?
I mean, when you talk to kids, and when I try to focus on very broad questions, how was the visit? What were your takeaways, thoughts, all that sort of stuff. And, the whole 33rd NFL idea, the NFL structure, and some of this is obviously what the staff is focusing in on. So that's kind of part of it, but that's what they bring up more than anything else. I think, the Carolina brand is well known. I think if we're being honest, it's more associated with basketball than football. But yeah, to answer the question, I think the NFL prospects idea that seems to be resonating a little bit more with recruits. To answer the other question about Belichick's age, I have not heard that come up, to be honest. I mean, I'm sure at some point it will, but I have not, I just hasn't been brought up to me. A lot of times those sort of situations will be on the side. Someone says, "Hey, how long do you think he's going to be there?" That sort of thing. I mean, that kind of came up earlier, I guess, very, very early on, but not for a while, really, to be honest.
Seems like transfer portal would cure that. I mean, if you don't like somebody, get out. You can leave and transfer out if the coach leaves or ages out or whatever. But anyway, Don Callahan, last thought / question to you. What's next? We are sitting here on April the 9th. We've talked about official visit season is really ramping up at North Carolina. A lot going on. The last practice of the spring, the practice like a pro as they're billing it, 6:30 in Kenan Stadium on Saturday night, open to the public. So certainly check it out. You can best believe Inside Carolina will be there in full force. But Don, what's next on the recruiting front as we close this one out?
To go back to the prior question, the practice like the pro, title for the spring game is kind of speaks to just their pitch, and this is what they're pitching to recruits. But what's next is, as you mentioned, the official visits. I mean, that's the main thing. And so we'll see official visits for, I expect the next few weekends all the way up until the summer deb period, which is June 23rd. The meat of the official visit schedule will occur in June. But as we saw this past weekend, there will be some movement from these April and May official visits. So definitely, we've been doing a really good job, I think, of trying to keep everybody up to date on who's on campus with official visitors and unofficial visitors. And the other thing too is, high school spring practices themselves usually begin in May. And so I'll be hitting up a lot of those local ones. And sometimes those help kind of alter some recruitments.
You come locally here, you need to let me know so I can go over to Clayton or Corinth or Cleveland or wherever you want to go. I can see Don Callahan in the wild doing his thing there. Maybe we do a show from there. But anyway,
Eric would love it. We can have him on. He's great personality. He has his own show, I think.
Yeah, we can do whatever you want to do, because Buck Sanders and the Inside Carolina crew have hooked us up with the ability to do anything, anywhere, anytime, and there's certainly no off season. Shout out to Don for all the information he brings. Shout out to Tarpit Premium Message Board folks that have been on here. Shout out to the folks in the live chat. This always makes it enjoyable. I'll be back with another football show at some point in the very near future with the noon dish. I guess we'll be back next week. Probably need to do these once a week given the heat of the recruiting cycle. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and Big Game USA. Get your official game ball of North Carolina from Big Game USA. You see it behind me. It's got all the logos you need and the blue laces. You can't get them anywhere else. You got to get them from Big Game USA. Don Callahan, my friend. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tommy.